Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. I'm so proud of myself for actually sitting down to schedule another wrap up in recent reads for you guys. I remember talking about in my last one how difficult it can be for me to actually sit down and do it, but once I do it and get it over with, I'm much better. And so I'm getting better mentally with just getting over that hump of actually sitting down to record these. And so I want to talk about some of the books that I read in June that was not mentioned on my channel to make sure that I am mentioning books that just don't come up in other content. So I have about 7 books that I read in the month of June that I want to make sure that I wrap up for you guys on my channel. First, we're going to start off with the TBR bingo that I do on my Patreon each month. For the month of June, since it is Pride Month, there were some prompts that focused on LGBTQIA+ representation and authors and things like that. So I wanted to make sure that I fit those in. And so one of the books that I picked up for that TBR bingo was Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I did like it. We're following Wallace, who never really experienced or lived life. He didn't have a lot of friends or social connections. He didn't really talk to family. He could be a bit of a jackass to people when they were interacting with him. But he finds himself suddenly unalived, and he is faced with the prospect of crossing over, but he's not willing to accept the fact that he has died because he feels like he hasn't really lived his life. So you're watching Wallace over the course of about a week interact with other characters that are supposed to be helping him come to terms with the fact that he is no longer alive and that it is time for him to pass on into the next life. I thought that this was a really cool book version of the movie Up, because you have this really grumpy centered character, and not that everyone around him is very sunshiny and rainbows. I actually really enjoy that he wasn't surrounded by very sunshiny characters. They're just people who see life for what it is. Sometimes you get the short end of the stick. Sometimes, you get bad luck and you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you go on with life. And so I really enjoyed watching him develop connections and friends that really help him understand that it's okay to feel what you feel, but you can't revel in that. You have to pick yourself up. You have to keep going. Sometimes don't take yourself so seriously. Laugh at a bad situation, because sometimes morbid humor is some of the best humor that there is, and that you don't need to be so happy and perky about life in order to enjoy it. Even though this isn't a new favorite for me, the life lessons and the experiences that our main character is going through reminded me so much of what I love about Frederick Bachman's story, because he can really create characters that you connect with on a human level, and that you understand just through your connection to humanity. And it was so nice to see all the things that I love about reading Frederick Bachman's story in a really fun, lighthearted fantasy story. And so I found TJ Klune's writing to be very similar in the way that it connected people through emotions and through experiences, even if it's not something that you're directly connected to or directly involved with. And I am looking forward to reading more by TJ Klune. I have In the Lives of Puppet. I got a special edition of that book, and I had not read anything by TJ Klune at that time, so I was I'm not really sure if I was going to pick it up or read it or unhaul it, but after reading this one and currently being halfway through The House in the Cerulean Sea, I am interested in picking up In the Lives of Puppets. I do understand why people enjoy his writing for sure. Then the next book that I read was actually called Powerless by Elsie Silver. This is book 4 in the Chestnut Springs series. We're following Winter, who is the sister of Summer from book 1, and Theo, who was also in book 1. Ironically, I still have not read book 1 of this series. I've read 2, 3, and 4, but I have not picked up the first book. I don't know why or what's taking me so long, but yeah, we're following Winter, who is 2 years older than Theo. She has recently left, the pressure of her mother as a doctor to go work at a hospital closer to Chestnut Springs, and she also has left her husband. So she's a newly divorced woman who has an unexpected surprise pregnancy with Theo after a very quick one-night stand, and then they don't communicate with each other for 18 months after that one night stand. So Theo is returning back to Chestnut Springs after being gone for a while, finding out that the woman that he liked, that he had a one night stand with, actually had a kid by him. So yeah, there's a lot of external components that goes into why Theo was unaware, and so I don't want to spoil that aspect. I will say that this one was very different from the first 2 books. The surprise pregnancy was very, very unexpected. I didn't expect to read something like that from Elsie Silver. And it threw me off at first. I was I don't know if this is going to be for me. I don't know if I'm interested in reading something like this, but I feel like eventually it kind of mellowed out as a story, and I got like to the point where I was like, okay, like it's not bothering me as much. Like I don't think surprise pregnancies bother me. It was the way that this surprise pregnancy was executed that really turned me off. But she managed to turn it around. I didn't want to DNF the story. I actually did end up finishing it, and I think I gave this like 3.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was okay. There wasn't as much spark from Winter as I would have liked. And there is a reason for that. I understand that because she didn't grow up in the most loving home, and being open with her emotions and securing other people around her is something that's really hard for her to do. But it became a bit of an unfair situation to watch Theo constantly reassure her, constantly pour love and kindness and acceptance into her. And it took her a really long time to give it back to him. And so I was just like, okay, like I wanted to see her try a little more and a little earlier in the book. And I, again, still understand all of the things that were in the way of her doing that. It started to feel a little unfair for Theo. That's the tricky part for me, I think, with stories like this where you have someone who is broken and need a lot of reassurance and love and acceptance, because the author has to write it in a way where they're learning to accept love and they're learning to take, but it doesn't become a take situation with no giving back or minimal giving back. And I feel like for most of this book, we were right on that precipice. We were right on that edge of this tipping over into Winter just sucking up all of Theo's like positive energy and giving him nothing but crap back, and not giving him the benefit of the doubt, not giving him that extended level of trust and love that I felt like he was giving her. And I think that that was the biggest hurdle for me to like really get involved with the romance. But other than that, Loveless is still my favorite. I need to read the first one to see like where I stand in the ranking with that one, because I can't say if the books are getting worse or better as they go along. They're all different for sure, but I need to read the first one before I can give like a real opinion on like how the books are progressing and whether or not it's time for her to like wrap up the series. I don't know who is going to be next, but I do know that the next book is set to release later this year, but I don't know who we're going to be following. Will I read it? Probably yeah, because I'm too deep invested at this point. Oh, it looks like the next book comes out in October. It's called Hopeless, but we don't know who we're following yet. It doesn't have a synopsis yet, but yeah, I'll probably be reading Hopeless still. And then the next book was our Patreon Book of the Month pick, and that was The Bone Shard Daughter. So the next book is my Patreon's Book of the Month pick for the month of June, and that was The Bone Shard Daughter. This was a very conflicting book for me because I thought that it had a very strong beginning and all of the intrigue and interest was there for me in the story, but then the middle was so stagnant and boring just for us to have a really good ending as we closed out the book. And so I don't really know what to do with that or like how to feel about that. And I don't even know if I still want to like really go into the next book anytime soon, because I don't know if the writing is going to get any better. I feel like the author overextended the interest that she built up in the beginning. Like it wasn't enough for her to just have us kind of sitting and reveling in our theories and our perspectives for the entire story, just to tell us that everything that we thought along the way wasn't what it was, and it wasn't reality, and we weren't really on the right track. And so it was like a bittersweet feel to me, because it's like, oh, like that's really impressive, because I thought that we were on one track and I thought that all these things were true, and I have been sitting in those perspectives for so long without you giving me any hints as to like I may not be right, I may be right, things may be not as they appear, just for you to tell me at the end that like I was wrong and the book ends. It's like, okay, what am I really supposed to do with that? But other than that, I still feel like there was nothing between like the 20 and the 80% mark of this story, like 60% of the book, there was just nothing there that I felt like I needed to be continuing to read the story. Like I was still stuck with my initial interest. She didn't do anything else to like grab me or reveal anything interesting enough throughout the story. And so because of that reason, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I need to hear from someone who has read the entire trilogy to see how they feel about it, because I've heard like a lot of conflicting things about the series as a whole, which will make sense because I'm very conflicted over reading the first book. But please, if you have read book 2 and book 3, let me know if it gets better. And by by better, I mean, does she actually do more to bring the reader along on the journey of the story? Because I feel like as I was reading it, she's telling the story, but she's not doing anything to reach out to her audience and to grab them and to make sure that they were still with her. She didn't really like do a temperature check, you know, to make sure that like we were all still paying attention, we were all still happy to be here, no one was getting, you know, bored or sleepy or whatever. I just feel like, yeah, she didn't really take time to consider her readers, and if she had, the pacing and the revelation throughout the story would be a little bit different. And so if you've read book 2 and book 3, let me know if she does more to bring us along on the story than what she did in book 1. Okay, and then the next 2 were a part of that TBR bingo, and so I picked up volume 2 of Heartstopper, which I am so glad that I did. This book made me so happy, so giddy with joy. I had such a good time. I was very nervous throughout this entire volume because we have Nick, who is dealing with a lot of internal processing because he has been attracted to women for majority of his life or most of his life, and now he's attracted to Charlie, and he doesn't really know what to do with that and whether or not he's ready to be open about it, whether or not he's ready to like share that with other people. And Charlie is so understanding. He is so accepting and so patient with Nick, and I thought that that was very beautiful because he really like emphasized the idea that Nick did not need to share any details about the relationship before he was ready, or about his sexuality before he was ready. But Nick's friends can be very homophobic, and so I was really nervous about how much Charlie was going to have to deal with and tolerate before Nick spoke up and defended him. And so I can say like with joy that I didn't have to like be nervous about things like that for long. But yeah, this volume was filled with situations that could have been very traumatic and disappointing for me. And as a reader who's so hopeful about their love and so invested in their romance and how innocent it is and how they're progressing, I would have been crushed at the same time. And so it's nice to see her handle such delicate situations so beautifully, and I can't wait to read volume 3. And then I picked up Witch Hat Atelier volume 2 because I read volume 1 on the last TBR bingo, and I loved it. And this one I picked up just for the vibes, just to have a good time. I shared this on my Patreon like that. I didn't care what was happening within the story. Like, was there a plot here? Yes. Okay, the author was dipping into their bag. They were really trying to give us a whole story here, a whole plot here, and they were doing the most because I was here just to be here. Like, I like being here, and so I was gonna come here anyway. But where this volume ended and the setup of the storyline for volume 3, I am very interested in, because I feel like we're at this point where there's gonna be a reckoning, and things are gonna change for Coco in a multitude of ways. But Witch Hat Atelier is continuing to be my favorite manga currently. If you have any other mangas that are similar to Witch Hat Atelier, let me know because I want all the reads. I'm loving this so far. And then the only book that I DNF'd in the month of June is Hamnet. I have had this on my TBR for years. I've been interested in picking it up, but for some reason, like, I could not get into the story. Like, I tried it in a digital format, I tried reading it physically, and at some point I even switched to the audiobook, but it just utterly failed to entice me, to grasp me. I was not interested in the slightest. It was such a deadpan and dead tone reading experience that I knew that there was nothing that the author could do past the beginning that was going to make me interested in the story. Like, this is a book that needs to really grasp you from the beginning and take you along on the ride, and I just could not vibe with it. It was not for me. I don't know if it was the writing tone or the characters. I don't know exactly what it was. Sometimes you read a book and you don't know what's not working for you. You just know that it's not. And I did not want to suffer through this book because I felt like I would have been unfair towards it. Like, if I had forced myself to continue reading this book, I would have deeply disliked it, and I would have been really harsh in my critiquing and in my rating just because of how unpleasant of a reading experience that it was. And so I decided to save me and Maggie O'Farrell here from that and to put this book down. I don't foresee myself ever going back to it because I didn't like it. And then lastly, we have probably one of the stars for the month of June because I did not make it through my entire TBR. I actually think I only read half of the amount of books that I was supposed to read in the month of June because I am coming up to my annual summer reading slump and I just couldn't be bothered to read obligated books. I was mostly just picking up mood reads, if any, at that point. So yeah, this is the only book on my TBR, my canon TBR, that I read and really loved, and that is going to be God Killer. One of the characters that we're following is Kissin, and she is a God killer. She lives in this world where gods can be created based off the belief and the will of the people. And so if they pour enough faith and belief into something, it can go from this idea or this concept to becoming a physical being of a god. And so there are tons of gods within this world. There's old gods, new gods, wild gods, gods of broken slippers, gods of fire, gods of door handles. Like, you can, if you believe in a god and enough people pour enough faith into it, give enough offerings to it, gods are created that way. There was a period a couple of years before the start of this book where the gods were at war with one another, and a royal family got involved, and a lot of the royal family members ended up passing away. And so the son, the last remaining son of this royal family, who is now the king, not going to be the king, he's now the king of this world, he fights alongside some of the gods, but then he ends up turning against them and banning any and all practice of religions because when the gods went to war, it was very catastrophic and humans really suffered the brunt of a godly war. And so he has banned religion entirely throughout his kingdom. And he's even left the home of the war in the city of Midran, which is where his family originally lived. And so now this is a city, it's a broken, dead city of lost and forgotten gods along the way. However, it's really hard to get a society of people to give up their belief in gods when they feel like it makes their lives easier. And so years later, post this war, we have Kissin, who is a god killer that goes around, very Geralt of Rivia, very The Witcher. She takes out gods in a similar manner. She's treated in a similar manner to Geralt of Rivia, but she has a lot of Brienne of Tarth vibes about her. So that was really cool to follow. She is sent to this town to kill this god, and she ends up meeting a young girl who is attached to a god in some way. And so it becomes very clear very soon that if they were to kill the god, that somehow it will impact and maybe even kill the little girl. And so they decide to travel to the dead city of Midran to figure out a way to separate these two. And then we have another character, his name is Elo. He's also involved on this journey, but he's traveling for a different reason that he is keeping secret from everyone else. And when they get to this city, basically all hell breaks loose. And I enjoyed the journey. I enjoyed them coming to like have this tentative and very fragile trust between one another, because we have a god who of course hates the god killer. We have a god killer who hates the god. And then we have this knight as well. And they're all traveling and protecting this little girl, and they face a lot of challenges along the way. So the book is very short, and I definitely think that that is to its detriment because a lot of things are left underdeveloped and in the gray area. A lot of explanations and details that I think you really need to solidify the story you just don't get. It almost feels as if we're reading a very abridged version of a longer fantasy book because there's just so much context that is lacking that I really feel like an additional 50 or 60 pages would have helped round out within the story. And even still, with this being more of a concept of a story than an actual story, I still loved it. I still love the characters. I still love the storyline. I still had a fun time reading it. I loved following Kissin. There's a heavy level of like queer normality to the story. Kissin herself is bisexual. Kissin also lost her leg during a tragic incident when she was a kid that led to the death of her entire family. And so you get to read about her, you know, struggling with her prosthesis, what it feels like to have phantom pains of a limb that is no longer there. But you also get to see her be a badass on page. She's fighting people. She's winning. She's definitely the one that you want protecting you. So I really love that we get to deep dive into her disability, but it doesn't dampen her ability to be on this journey and to be protecting this younger girl. And the younger girl herself, you can tell that there's a lot more to her than what we initially find out. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing like where the author's going to go with the series. I will be continuing with the series. And as much as I would love to just rave about this book and tell everyone to pick it up, I do have to add the caveat of there is just a lot of underdeveloped, imperfect things about this story that may be a bother to you, but it didn't dampen my enjoyment of it. And it's very short. So I still highly recommend you pick it up anyway. those are the books that I wanted to talk about that I read in the month of June that I had not gotten a chance to wrap up on my channel just yet. Thank you guys for making it to the end of my video, and I will see you in the next one.